Thank you for joining us today for our Conservation Circle webinar series. I'm Sophie Benbow, I'm FFI's Head of Marine, and I'm really pleased to be able to lead the discussions today with some of our amazing partners from around the world. As we navigate the world under the new limitations imposed by the pandemic, we're all learning new ways to conserve critical landscapes and species. The ocean is a lifeline for people and communities worldwide, and more than 3 billion people globally depend on marine and coastal biodiversity for a living. The small-scale fishing communities with whom FFI works are inherently vulnerable to the global pandemic, and remote island communities are particularly at risk without revenue streams from fishing or tourism. Across the marine programme, FFI's model of working to support effective local partners has achieved significant successes. And today we'll be speaking to some of our partners who work in these landscapes and to share their insights from the field. Before we get started, I wanted to share a few notes on our format. So we have an hour for this session with time for Q&A at the end. Please remember that there is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. So please feel free to enter any questions as you think of them, and we'll try to answer as many of them possible at the end. Please do be patient with the web format. We sometimes have technical difficulties. We'll do our best to run smoothly, but I appreciate your patience. So thanks again to all of you for joining us. I hope the discussions are enjoyable and that you enjoy seeing what your generous contributions are helping to support during these challenging times. As I'm sure some of you are aware, FFI launched a Partner Crisis Support Fund in the midst of lockdown, which has enabled us to channel emergency support to FFI's marine partners in Cabo Verde, Honduras, Santa Tomé and Príncipe, and Kenya. We're happy to be joined by 3 of these groups today and to help them mitigate against the immediate impacts of COVID-19. In addition, we have been able to repurpose some international travel budget lines to support the provision of critical basic food supplies in Honduras, Indonesia, and Myanmar. Now we will directly go and hear from some of our partners around the world. First of all, we head to Cabo Verde. So the Republic of Cabo Verde is a marine biodiversity hotspot, which supports a wealth of globally important and endemic marine species, including 5 species of marine turtle, and it boasts one of the 3 largest nesting populations of loggerhead turtles in the world. FFI's work has focused on Mayo, a candidate UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve, which is a relatively undeveloped island under increasing pressure from tourism, coastal habitat destruction, and unsustainable and illegal fishing. So now I'd like to introduce our first speaker. So Sara Ratao is the Marine and Terrestrial Programs Coordinator for Fundação Mayo Biodiversidade in Cape Verde. FFI has been supporting FMB to implement a network of protected areas on the island of Mayo since 2012. And I'll pass you over now to Sara.
Thank you very much, Sophie. So I've been, just a bit of introduction, I've been coming to Cape Verde since 2010. I've started to work at FMB as a Marine and Terrestrial Program Coordinator since 2016. Laura will be putting up some maps just to give a bit of introduction where Cabo Verde is in case people don't know. So Cabo Verde is an archipelago of 10 islands, about 450 kilometers west of Dakar, Senegal. So Mayo itself, where FMB is based, it's one of the most southeastern islands of the archipelago. It's a very small island, and it has 7 protected areas, as you'll see, in which five of which have a marine component. There you go. So you'll see all these brown and blue limits are basically the limits of these 7 protected areas. You'll see particularly the north and the southern protected area have quite big marine component. So the marine program started in 2014 with the Darwin Initiative funding, and it has been improving since. It basically consists of running several surveys to check for trends of marine species, as well as habitats. So some of the things we do is fish counting surveys, for example, to check fish biomass and diversity. We also do some BRUVs, which stands for Baited Remote Underwater Video Stations, in which basically we set up this camera, leave it at the sea bottom to record for about an hour, and then we analyze the video in the office, again, for fish diversity, presence and absence of species, etc. This is particularly good for sharks and rays as well. We also do cetacean boat surveys for whales and dolphins. Very important because we do get the humpback whales from the North Hemisphere that come here to breed during springtime, amongst other work that we do. So a lot of our work, it is related to the marine protected areas, and all the data that we've been collecting since the beginning has been used to improve impact assessment studies, particularly in the last 2 years, help with biodiversity action plans, national species list, and one of the most recent to help improving the proposal for Maio as UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve, which we'll know where we got this in November. So far it's looking good. The Marine Program also has a very important role in monitoring illegal activities, and we do this using 3 different tools mainly. One of them is the Guardians of the Sea. So the Guardians of the Sea is a program that started in 2016 with 20 fishermen from different communities of Maio, and their role is basically to monitor illegal fishing activities in their fishing grounds. This program has been very successful, even though it's a slow progress program, but it's going well. It is now being replicated in Sal and Boa Vista Islands through our collaborators, Project Biodiversity and BRCV, 2 other NGOs from these islands. The idea is to actually expand it even further to all the islands in Cabo Verde, if possible. Another tool we use, it's called the Enforcement Group. This group started at the end of 2015 and involves 7 institutions and authorities of the island of Maio. And basically we go around the islands doing several field trips per month to check on illegal activities. And we also run several meetings throughout the year to check how these activities have been going, if they're increasing, decreasing, why, and trying together to look for solutions to tackle these. Then we also work with the fishing inspector as well as the maritime police. So during quarantine, FMB, similar to all the other places, we had to close down basically at the office. So this obviously affected a lot of our project activities, but all funders were very understanding and flexible, obviously given the situation. So apart from project activities that we had to cancel, all the other meetings that we had planned, so meetings with the fishermen, fishing associations, homestays, and all of our educational awareness program had to be cancelled with the school as well. Luckily, the government announced we were undergoing quarantine in April I think it was about a week and a half before, so we managed to have some time to prepare for it. So we talked to 4 of our most reliable guardians of the sea, so they could continue monitoring illegal fishing activities during that month, basically, which they did. In addition to that, during quarantine, FMB also kept doing weekly surveys weekly trips around the island in collaboration with the local police, as well with the council, to provide support for the communities. So just to give you an idea, it's very, very small island. There isn't a proper public transport system, and because of quarantine, all the people that use these hiaces to go around as a public service, they were pretty much shut down as well. So a lot of the communities were pretty much by themselves, completely isolated. So we talked to all the authorities and we agreed to do these weekly trips to make sure everyone was okay. We provided 2 emergency numbers, which people actually used. So we had to take, in 4 different instances, we had to take people to the hospital. And we also helped other institutions like the Red Cross, for example, in distributing food and hygiene baskets by providing a car and a driver. In terms of increasing threats, luckily Maio hasn't been massively affected by the COVID. So fishermen, for example, they were still able to go out and do their work. The main issue was that possibly because a lot of people lost their jobs, they were struggling to sell their fish. So what they did was, several of them, they decided to go over to Santiago Island, where the capital is, which is next to mine, to sell their fish there at a higher price, which they usually do. So during the COVID situation, FMB took a decision of not taking any international volunteers for health measures. So these obviously had an impact in our turtle program, which occurs mainly during summertime until about October, November. We do take a lot of international volunteers to be able to patrol effectively all the beaches of Mayo and to protect the turtles properly. So this year we had to adapt. So we had to work even more with the local communities to make sure we had the minimum amount of people to be able to patrol all the beaches as well. But obviously this also affected our salaries. So a lot of the money that the volunteers pay, it actually goes to pay the salaries of the turtle guides and staff. So obviously this is where FFI Emergency Crisis Fund was amazingly helpful. Thank you very much. Very important to us. It helped us pay several administration costs, as well as salaries for turtle guards, turtle leaders, homestays for the leaders to stay as well while they work during turtle season. In terms of threats itself, we did not see a massive increase apart from illegal sand extraction from the beach before turtle season, and an increase of turtle poaching post-quarantine. So this would be during, obviously, turtle nesting season. We do not know whether this increase in turtle poaching has to do with the fact that people suddenly lost their jobs for a month, or if it has to do with the fact that suddenly we have a massive boom of turtles nesting in general in Cabo Verde, not just in Mayo. And it's very difficult to pinpoint this because Mayo has a very strong tradition of turtle meat consumption. So we're not quite sure why this is happening yet. So for the future, one of our aims is definitely to improve our volunteer program, particularly the marine program. It's definitely a high priority for FMB, as this is one of the things that keep us sustainable. So unfortunately, we had this idea actually to create a shop similar to what RSPB or BTO have. So it helped us to become a bit more sustainable. However, in Cabo Verde, that is not allowed. So NGOs are not allowed to have any type of profit. So we had to give up that idea for now. So what we're thinking is, we've been running since 2016 a 2-week field trip for master students from Queen Mary University of London, where it's a very intense 2-week field trip where all the students, they're able to try all the different surveys that we do in the morning and in the afternoon, and they learn about conservation issues in situ. So it's very good, and we always had really good feedback on this. So one of the things that we're thinking that it could be a good possibility to become more sustainable is to actually try to expand these projects, this field trip to other universities too. So due to the still lack of fish inspections and law enforcement, FMB is also trying to apply in the future for blue economy projects. So this would be mainly to help local artisanal fishermen with their work and to improve management and protection of marine protected areas. Finally, we hope to continue working with local authorities as we have been for years to help improving law enforcement and the monitoring of illegal activities in the island. I think that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sara. I think it's always interesting to hear how conservation groups can respond to support on those more humanitarian needs and issues in times of crisis. That's really positive to see that FMB has been able to support those communities, and also very important to celebrate the amazing numbers of turtle nests we've had this season. That's fantastic to hear. So thank you for sharing. So now we're going to move on to East Africa. The North Kenya coast supports a mosaic of largely intact coastal and marine habitats, including the country's largest wetland and 60% of Kenya's mangroves. This all supports a diverse array of marine species, including sharks, dolphins, dugongs, and sea turtles, as well as rich inshore and pelagic fisheries. The communities along the Kenyan coast depend extensively on marine resources, and since 2011, FFI has been working with the Northern Rangelands Trust Coast a regional office of the Northern Rangelands Trust to promote sustainable fisheries management. Our second speaker is Gedi, the country director for NRT Coast. He completed the MPhil in Conservation Leadership at the University of Cambridge in 2017 as an Oranda Rothschild Scholar, and then returned to Kenya for his current role with NRT Coast. So Isa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sophie, for the introduction, and greeting to everyone of you. I first take this opportunity to thank FFI for creating this platform to share what has been a complicated year for the world of conservation and to the general human population. And if you can share the map for NRT just to show the focus for our region in terms of. So NRT support 39 conservancies across Kenya, so that covers around 11 counties and separated into regions, so that in terms of ease of management support to these community conservancies. So my focus and area of mandate is NRT Coast, that is supporting 7 community conservancies, and you can see they are divided into 3 counties: Garissa County, Lamu County, and Tana River County. And all these are some of them neighboring conservancies. Sharbini, where you have the Hirola, one of the most critical endangered species. The Tara Ndera is one of the also a hotspot for primates, one of the most critical endangered species. The red colobus, the Tana Mangabeys, Hansha Nyongoro, which also forms the interior to dispersal corridors for this movement of this wildlife. And Lower Tana, one of the most delta hotspot in international side, where you have a different bird species, and also forms also part of a habitat for the Tana primates. So also forms part of the marine environment. So Lower Tana Delta is also towards on the southern coast from Kiunga. So they also lies within the primate. So you have all the species of mangrove there, an aspect of marine there, where the Tana River actually enters the Indian Ocean. So it forms a very good, interesting habitat. And on the far north, you have a Pate. Pate is purely marine community, focusing on the management of the natural resources within the marine landscape. And Kiunga, one of also a national reserve, but also an interesting factor where communities, conservators also came in to support the work the KWS have been doing. And the Boni, which is the hotspot for the militia of Al-Shabaab, is also towards also the edge of the marine. So our focus today is purely on the marine environment, and I will talk about the larger, bigger impact of the COVID-19 or the pandemic, and I will also mention something about how small-scale fishers have been responding and adapting, and also as an organization, what are the priorities and focus, and how do we navigate around until we have probably a very stable environment. So in terms of the pandemic and the impact, the larger, there has completely been a very delay in terms of programs because of the restrictions. Doing a community meeting, because our work mainly is about involving community, participatory sort of approach, having meetings at the local levels, engaging communities in terms of buying into ideas of conservation. There are also an aspect of locally managed areas where communities need to protect. So there's aspect of the whole program have actually been delayed. And there is also an aspect of increasing threats, especially logging. Some now that fishers in terms of market have really reduced, and people have now opted to do another income activities, either by illegally engaging in illegal logging, like the mangrove cutting. And there's also use of illegal gears for the fishers, especially now that the pelagic, which have been attracting international market, even national markets, have really reduced, and the local markets demand for small size fish, the mussels. So that has made people now to use much on pressure of the gear of the illegal gears. So that has put in terms of destruction, the habitats like the corals, and that is something that we are also witnessing. So in terms of a protected species, like a pressure on protected species, especially the sea turtles. And this is over the last 2 to 3 months, we have seen cases of people having the turtle eggs, making some pancakes and all those things. So is probably we've seen a sort of a diversification to some of their living and creating every possible to make sure that people have a meals on their table. So there's also an increased bycatch from use of set net, and this has not been so much common. So we feel like people are now putting more pressure on the seascape, and lots of market for the seafood. So these people, some of them have been depending on the Hong Kong, China market for lobsters and crabs and all those things. So initially, 1 kg of lobster used to cost for around 40 US dollars, and currently selling at $7. So people has really been affected in that, and these have now made an aspect where fishers who have been initially fishing lobsters have now joined again to in the activities like the mussels, the small fishes. So this has put the population, people are now shifting the aspect of initially a specialized area. So there's also an aspect of reduced funding. So I think most of the philanthropic now actually focuses on pandemics, the mask and all those things. So it's becoming quite challenging. So the operation of the conservancies in terms of fuel, the areas you need to reach with patrol, some of these are actually being affected across. And as a local small-scale fishers, in terms of how are they adapting to this? So there is a change of fishing method. So because of now they need to put themselves within what the market demands. So use of these illegal gears and having interest in the small size fishes. And lobsters also changing the tax now from lobster fishers to again the mussels. And we also had a women late octopus closure. So there are 4 closures, 2 actually no-tox zones where we expect the recovery of the fish, the breedings, and then there are 2 temporary octopus, women late, and so they close for like 4 months, and then they start fishing during the season. So initially they came as a women association, and then they have a sort of a circle, an association that they keep for every 1 kg of octopus sold, then they give a small percentage to saving. That increase the culture of savings, and also what will be a larger support to the communities. And that for the last I think we have opened the last opening was 4th of August from the last closure. And this time around, while they have sold 1 kg, last time 250 per kg, this time in the local market, even in the market, they were trailing for 100 shilling per kg. So with that, they have persuasively negotiated, and then they sold 170 shilling. So this time around, they say they are not saving a single a percentage out of it, and they just want to cut more for the income within the household. So that is also something that is working for the community. And also in terms of NRT priority, I think now that this thing has got us off guard, and how do we need to make sure that such pandemics will not lead us to that kind of devastation. So one thing is actually increased income diversification. So we had some program of microfinance where we give soft loans, asset credits to some of these fishers so that they can repay in a period, and then it becomes a revolving fund. So if I get today, I repay after 10 months, then it goes to my neighbor, or it goes to the next person who is on the list. So that has really been helpful, and we are now increasing that scale. We started with, for example, in Pate, 65 women benefited the last program we rolled out early this year, and now we are increasing to another group of 108. So that by total 230 households will have been reached by this microfinance program. So again, because of also women participation in conservation, we have given 2 boats to women fishers to support their fishing, especially on the deep seas. So that has also been something that we have quite interest. And then new market, a development for products. So We're also thinking how can we increase the link to local markets that has interest in the pelagic and lobsters, while also improving the value chain, is supporting like them with cold storage facilities, and ensure that no fish is actually lost in the process of being caught. So the last thing is about ensuring the certification for fish products, so like the lobster. So we want to give these communities sort of a label sort of certification, and that is through the fisheries department, to make sure that some of these products are labeled and then they can competitively recognize within the market. And the other thing is high effective to the LMMS, because we have seen there have been some activities within the LMMS that have been now disrupted, and communities feel a lot of pressure within the NOTEC zone. So we want to increase the response and make sure that rangers do the work effectively in terms of patrolling. So also in terms of improving the governance of the BMUs, the conservancies, and as well as the CFA. So those forms a interesting part for CFA. The mangrove also have pressure. So if we increase the governance and strengthen their governance in terms of how they manage and respond to these kind of challenges, also becomes quite. So that's all I had, and I think if there's any question, I will respond.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Issa. That was really interesting. It sounds like you've been having a tough time of it in Kenya, with increasing threats to turtles and those shifts in fishing effort that you've been recording. And there've obviously been some quite serious financial impacts on communities with the losses of that international export market. But it's really wonderful to hear the positive story from the octopus temporary closure and the increased price premiums as a result. And also the steps you've made with regards to income diversification for the communities. So thank you so much for sharing all that. It's really interesting.
Thank you.
Now we're going to sail across the ocean. We're going to go to Honduras. So we're working on the Atlantida coast of Honduras at the southern tip of the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef, which has highly biodiverse coastal wetlands, well-preserved mangrove forests, and a patchwork of islands, which support 3 flagship species: the hawksbill turtle, Utila spiny-tailed iguana, and the Antillean manatee. In 2015, FFI and 5 Honduran NGO partners began working across 3 socially and ecologically connected MPAs: the Cuero Salado Wildlife Refuge, the Cayos Cochinos Marine National Monument, and part of the Bay Islands National Marine Park, to form a wider seascape. Since then, we have successfully established an integrated management system that supports biodiversity and local fishing communities, and enables those fishing communities to take an increasing role in the management of the seascape. The project has promoted cooperative and collaborative management at local, regional, and national levels, and the seascape is gaining positive and national recognition. Recently, it was included in the Honduran Presidential Office's National Plan, a key political document that sets national decision-making priorities. And really positively, fisher representatives from the seascape now contribute to national fishing industry decision-making. So today, I'm pleased to say we're joined by one of the implementing partners of the seascape. Ivany Argueta is the Executive Director of Fundación Cuero Salado, or FUCSA, the lead co-manager of the Cuero Salado Wildlife Refuge. She oversees a range of projects in the refuge, including mangrove restoration, surveillance and protection in partnership with the Navy, manatee monitoring, and environmental education. And I should also say thank you very much for getting up so early, Ivany, and over to you.
Thank you, Sophie, for your presentation. For your introduction. Maybe I would like to show some of the few slides that I have to show you and showcase our area. So first of all, I would like to emphasize that I am here representing the outstanding work of 5 local NGOs that work together with FFI in Honduras. These organizations not only work to protect for these protected areas, but they also work for helping 17 coastal communities that depend on these marine sites and their resources. These organizations can be seen in the logos in the presentation. Fundación Cayos Cochinos, Fundación Islas de la Bahía, Centro de Estudios Marinos, La Recotur, and Fundación Cuero Salado, the organization that I lead. Since 2016, our work in the Seascape through the Darwin Initiative and Argueta project led to the creation of a Seascape committee. Impressively, this committee has been the first and only committee ever created in the region that has facilitated dialogue and cooperation between communities, co-managing NGOs, and government authorities. The committee has been a platform where voices of fishers can be heard and where they can engage with all levels of the government. We're proud to mention that because these projects have ensured the inclusivity of women in all dialogues, 4 of fishing women have been elected as presidents or vice presidents in different fishing associations. This space of dialogue has without question improved the governance within the Seascape, as intervention strategies in our areas are now being executed with the involvement of all these communities. And equally important is that the communities that are outside these protected areas are now also involved in the conservation and management of the Seascape. Now, I expand specifically in the success of the Seascape Committee because in the light of the far-reaching impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic in our coastal marine areas, and as our country entered complete lockdown in March of this year, this committee held a series of sessions to identify the new challenges that our areas, our communities, and our organizations were facing in order to take immediate actions to measure these challenges and to counteract them. In the Atlantida Seascape and within the protected areas, these are the Atlantic Seascapes and the protected areas are major tourism destinies in the northern coast of Honduras, and tourism revenues basically make up over half of the conservation budget needed to protect our remote areas. However, in some of our NGOs, this budget has already dried up, leading to cuts in operational budgets, resulting in a cascade of impacts, including, for example, reduction of staff salaries, leave without pay for some of our administrative staff or including rangers, reduction of ranger patrols for some months, not for the whole period, but it did happen for several months. And this resulted in an increase in environmentally damaging activities, including more agricultural encroachment, especially in the terrestrial areas or the coastal areas, illegal logging of hardwoods, mangroves as well, illegal fishing and poaching, especially of our flagship or emblematic species. There has been emerging reports from Fundación Islas de la Bahía and from Fundación Cuero Salado of an increase of poaching of our emblematic species and illegal marine resource extraction linked to the loss of livelihood due to the pandemic. This has been particularly alarming because we have seen that there is an increase in new people hunting, for example, the Utila swamper, which is the endemic iguana of the Utila Island. And in Cuero Salado, we've seen, in Cuero Salado and Cayos Cochinos, we've seen that there are new fishers or people that didn't fish before were venturing into this activity. However, and many of them were choosing damaging illegal gears like fishing nets to venture into this activity. For the case of manatee, hunting has not occurred within Cuero Salado, but we have received several reports of manatee death due to poaching or entanglement of fishing nets within rivers outside Cuero Salado. And we believe this might also be the case for turtles as well. In Cayos Cochinos, the The NGO has reported that there has also been extraction, for example, of lobster in areas that the extraction is prohibited. In terms of the government, the pandemic has created a disruption in the government framework. For example, the government institutions that work for natural marine resources or for the conservation of natural marine resources are only attending emergencies and activities that actually provide some revenue for the government, such as license or permit issuance. And the environmental public prosecutors are also only attending cases where the perpetrator is actually captured doing the illegal activity, which is not always the case. And like, for example, we've had some fires occurring in the core zone of our areas, but this, if we don't capture the offender or the perpetrator of this activity, then the environmental report is not attended. It will be attended later, but after the pandemic has been, or the emergency has been lifted. We've also had problems with direct impact with reallocation of government budget because it has been prioritizing health and humanitarian aid. For example, the Forestry Conservation Institute, which is the institute in charge of managing the national system of protected areas, did not receive the budget to hire the rangers of several protected areas, including Cuero and Salado, for the year 2020. Now, from an economic and social perspective within our communities, the national imposed closures, because we've had them, and the travel restrictions have resulted in an abrupt halt of many of the commercial transactions within our fishing communities, including tourism, as I mentioned it earlier. And this has definitely resulted in the loss of employment and rural livelihoods. For example, more than 5,000 small scale fishers have been affected by the quarantine at different levels. And although many did not stop fishing, the quarantine limitations have made it difficult for the fishers to sell their products. On the other hand, local guides, which basically are the ones that provide tours, have been more impacted, as many of them depend exclusively on the tourism activity. In the month of June and July, Centro de Estudios Marinos conducted a survey to assess the perception of coastal fishing communities to evaluate the degree of impact the pandemic had caused on their livelihoods, and how the cost, to identify the causes of disruption to their fishing activity, and what were the coping strategies that the communities adopted to mitigate these perceived disruptions. As you can see in the graph, in the pie graph, the main, about 96% of the fishers felt that they had been affected or severely affected by the pandemic. And they mentioned that the main causes of this impact has been the restriction on the transit, or the access to different ports or different cities, or different markets where they can actually sell their products. There has also been health and safety concern to avoid being infected by the COVID-19. And some others mentioned that they were trying to avoid sanctions because the government has strict quarantine procedures to actually go out and move around the cities. What's quite important is that in the next slide, where it discusses that the strategies to mitigate the impact, we can see that the most efficient strategies implemented by families have been actually fishing for the communities, but this has been fishing to sell their product within their communities or communities next by, or to fish for subsistence for their families. Some have actually used all their savings. They have ventured into new jobs, including agriculture. An analysis made for Gallos Cochinos, they mentioned that remittance from relatives from the foreign has also helped many of the communities and tolerate all this time without jobs. So what's very important is that it's very curious that although the fishing activity in the whole region has been reduced, at the same time, it has been the most important functional activity to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19. So thanks to FFI and the flexibility of the donors and the Partner Crisis Fund, our organizations have been able to respond to the pressure and demand of these 17 communities. The aid has been especially important for families that depend solely on tourism. And it's what's really important is that it has also been beneficial for our organization because it has helped strengthen our relationship with our communities or the communities that we work for. The Crisis Fund has also helped our organizations acquire biosecurity equipment to comply with government biosecurity regulations and continue with our conservation actions within our areas. The Crisis Fund has particularly helped Fundación Islas de la Bahía to fund operational costs of the iguana station, the iguana breeding program, increase iguana monitoring and mangrove patrol with municipal police, targeted the illegal poachers that I was mentioning previously, and increase environmental awareness campaign in some of the communities or where in the areas that are possible for the protection of the iguana. So as the country emerges from lockdown phase, our goal as partners with FFI is to enable all these small-scale fisheries organizations to emerge from all this disruption caused by the COVID-19 with an improved fisheries economy, with a more resilient marine ecosystem, and with a stronger voice in marine governance. So we are looking for enabling our small-scale fisheries to access the markets that can provide actually greater value for their products. And in the long term, we need to develop stronger and more efficient value chains, build capacities, and work with digital innovation. However, it is very likely that our marine resources will be extracted in an excessive way to recover the economy. And this represents increasing threat to our resources and the ecosystems within our area. So we're also looking to improve and modify fishing practice to ensure sustainability of marine resources and implement action plans that can contribute to the economy with alternative projects to fishing and complementary to tourism. Additionally, to improve the biosecurity conditions of our communities. So in conclusion, the COVID pandemic has made our organizations as well evaluate the conservation in our country actually depends on tourism, and that it is necessary that we diversify our income. And at the end, that fisheries are an activity that can be beneficial to livelihood and biodiversity at the same time if it is implemented sustainably. Thank you very much.
Great, wonderful. Many thanks, Ivany. It's very worrying to hear that fishing effort has increased, and by people that are not traditionally fishers, so they aren't maybe aware of some of those traditional restrictions and on gear types and species. Yeah. But really positive as well to hear that the protection and surveillance within the MPA has been maintained through this crisis. Yeah. So I think that's a good story. It's clear across all of our sites, I think, that small-scale fisheries have been heavily impacted. I'm going to turn to a couple of questions now. I know many of you picked up on the fact that small-scale fishers have been impacted and their revenue has decreased, but I wondered if you can just tell me what you think is the main urgent need that small-scale fishers in your project sites need. And I'll go back to Ivany. It's just been in mid-flow, if I may.
Well, as mentioned before, the problem that we've had is all the restriction in mobility. I think it is important to bring this necessity to the table. I think the committee that we have conformed that has government institutions as part of the Seascape committee to know that this has been affecting their how they sell their products. And it's very important because the government, it's pushing, or it's trying to aid agriculture activities and fishing activities, but it probably doesn't understand this gap and how important artisanal fisheries is for local communities.
Yeah, great, thank you. Sara, Isa, would you like to respond on that one?
Yeah, I think in our case, in general, fishermen, local fishermen, they don't feel they have the support they need from the government. So a lot of them don't really trust the government anymore. So what happens, just to give you an idea, is that projects come along and there's a lot of meetings with fishermen, and then either things don't move forward or they go until where the money ends, basically, until the project ends, and then there's several years of emptiness again. So we definitely think that this situation needs to be reversed. So there's a lot of illegal activities happening. So a lot of turtle poaching this year, especially at sea as well, not only on land. There's a lot of illegal fishing with, so for example, within the 3 nautical miles from shore, it's exclusively for artisanal fishermen only. However, and I barely go to the fields, just walking down to the beach side, I can see semi-industrial boats here every single day, pretty much. So this is why I think fishermen don't trust authorities anymore, because they complain about this to them and they don't see anything being done. It doesn't mean that they're not doing it and they're not reporting back to the base, but what they see is that the situation continues regardless. So that's why we're trying to work with authorities. Obviously, I think this needs to be investment from the government itself as well. So there's a need for changing some of the priorities. So they basically they get some more funding for artisanal fishermen, and they definitely, one of the things that it's very taught in every single workshop I've been in the last 4 years is a lack of inspections. So this needs to change. The law enforcement has to happen. And they have to provide the minimal conditions for the local people to do their work, because otherwise fishermen have been complaining. There has been an obvious change in the last 20 years of fishing catch. So before, I talked to several fishermen, the older ones, and they say that they would just go out of this bay, very close bay we have here, and get like 3 meters tuna. Now it's very rare that you get 1.5 meters tuna length. So it's getting worse, and yeah, it's just the priorities. We're trying to work with the government to see what we can do.
Great, thank you. Isa, would you like to just quickly summarize what you think is the kind of key need for the small scale fishers in Kenya? If you're still with us. No, all right, we'll jump on. We've had another question come in, which I think feeds on some of the points that you were making, Sara, around industrial, semi-industrial fleets, specifically around the kind of vast Chinese fleets that exist everywhere. But I guess the question is more broad. What effect do we think these large international, predominantly industrial fleets have on the local fish stocks and the local biodiversity in the sites that we're working in? Sara?
Yeah, so this is definitely one of the issues we have in West Africa, and Cabo Verde is not, it's also affected by this, basically. So there is since the 90s, early 90s, there has been this agreement with the European Union to be able to fish in here. This agreement has been renewed every 4 years, and it's not a very good agreement for the Cape Verdean side. So it basically says they're allowed to catch billfish, tuna, and other similar type of fish. They don't specify which one is the similar type fish. And we know there has been an obvious change of bycatch of sharks to become target fish. So now it's like 90% shark capture. And this is from the European Union. We also know that a lot of vessels with containers ship shark fins to Vigo. And I know Biosphere One, another NGO in São Vicente, where the main port is for industrial transport. It's trying to call attention to this situation as well. We know Chinese boats are fishing here, but I never heard of any agreement. So I don't know if this is something that's, it's a tricky situation for the government. I don't know if it's something that they don't want to put it out there in the public, because there's already the situation with the European and people are not particularly happy about it. But it has definitely an effect. So there has been a decrease in big pelagic fish, including sharks, in several islands in Cabo Verde. Maio, luckily, it's because it hasn't have that much development yet. We still have some bays where we see nurse sharks, for example, and there's a very important bay for nurse shark nursery area and breeding area where we see several of them. But this doesn't happen to many of other Cape Verdean islands. Yeah. So some of the fishermen actually told me they started to catch some sharks as well and mantas, just because there's nothing else they can catch. So they told me they think the European Union, all these other industrial big vessels, Chinese vessels, Japanese, they've been catching so much that they basically left with the small fish, and they just have to capture these species sometimes just to basically make do with the situation.
Okay, lovely. Ivany, would you like to speak to that point about the kind of industrial fleets and the impacts that might be having on our more nearshore areas of work?
Yeah, for Honduras, it has been a different case or a different scenario, and is that we had a new fishing law published in 2016, and sadly, it reduced the nautical miles. I think it's in English, that how you say it, from where artisanal fishers can actually fish. Reduced a lot. Also, the classification of the type of artisanal fishing boats has also affected, because boats that we believe or we consider are already industrial, because they can carry more tanks or more cages to capture lobster, have been reclassified and classified as actually artisanal fishing boats. This has really, and we believe is going to affect in the long term the resources along the coastline of our area. However, there is a complete separation between the industrial fishing sector with the artisanal sector. Added to that, we have the institution that leads, which is called the FFI, which is in charge of all our marine resources. It's one of the weakest organizations or institutions that the government has. So they're more interested in issuing permits and license for industrial fishing. They don't attend artisanal fishings. With FFI, Darwin's projects and Arcadia projects, our organizations have actually been helping this institute to license artisanal fishers. We are the only ones actually regulating any activity, any illegal activity along the coast, or at least within our areas. So there is actually lack of surveillance by this institute or by the Navy. So at the end, it's probably gonna affect. And the last, I think the law is not complete because it requires an implementation part. So it is very difficult even for the HEPESCA in this case to actually implement the law.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, obviously a big conflict that we all need to get kind of balance in our work, that the issue between the small scale fishers and those larger scale fleets. One final quick question, if I may, as we are reaching the end of our time today. I think everybody, and I think we've lost Isa, unfortunately, so we're just left with two of our panelists. I think you've both spoken with some degree of hope with regards to the situation that we currently find ourselves in. And I just wondered if you could give me a really quick answer. What is giving you hope now and moving forwards? Sara.
So we've been working for several years now with the help of FFI and Darwin and Acadia projects in marine protected areas. We've been now since 2017 particularly started to work a lot more with fishing associations and fishermen. So we actually help them become a lot more independent. We did several workshops on capacity building, and we're trying to help them organize themselves to be able to become a bit more independent and sustainable. So with this in mind, I think obviously this is a long process because awareness doesn't, it doesn't happen from one day to the other, unfortunately, but it is going on. And I do think a lot of fishermen are changing their mindsets. So they're trying to see things in a more sustainable way. Obviously not everyone, and of course we still have some groups that are still more resistant. But I think in general, all the younger generations as well, they're becoming a lot more aware of the need of balance between human activities and the environment. And the COVID is just one of the examples for that. So we do think that continuing working with marine protected areas and the fishermen will hopefully help the situation in Maya. And hopefully in other islands as well.
Thank you. Ivany, do you have just a quick sentence? What's giving you hope?
Well, I think in terms of social development, our communities are getting organized. I think having the support and the interest of them to participate in these platforms where they can engage with the government, it's really important. So they are not isolated anymore. Being organized really has a sense of more power from our communities. We have seen increase in interest of many organizations also interested in supporting many of our actions. For example, Cousteau is the leader in manatee conservation in the country, and we've had so many other institutes now interested in doing conservation and replicating what we're doing in the refuge. And finally, I think having international organizations with their eyes over us and helping us in a process that is in the long term, I think definitely this will help. Planting this seed in a baseline, a very strong baseline will definitely be a good fundament for the future. So yeah,
thank you. Thank you. As we move forwards from today, FFI will obviously continue to work across our portfolio to ensure that fishers and fishing communities have their basic needs met, and that the pandemic is not exacerbating those direct threats to marine biodiversity. The current focus on more social impacts, I think, is understandable and urgent, and the initial focus of FFI's Crisis Support Fund has been to ensure that our valued partners, such as those we've heard from today, are sustained through these challenging times. FFI will continue to support those partners to understand the impact of COVID-19 on their work, and we're currently adapting our crisis fund to evolve into a mechanism which can help partners develop ways to adapt and thrive into the future. Crucially, we hope to have sufficient resources to be able to directly support small-scale fishing communities, helping them to navigate through the easing of lockdown restrictions and to promote a more sustainable blue economy. If you'd like to learn anything else about our marine programme, Laura will be adding some more relevant links into the chat now. And please do feel free to reach out to her afterwards if you'd like any further information on any of the projects or FFI's marine work in general. So it just remains to be said, many thanks again to all of our speakers, to all of you for listening, and for all the funders and donors that keep these programmes of work running, particularly through these difficult times. I wanted to end with a quote from the great ocean explorer Jacques Cousteau, which I think sums up the importance of the ocean and perhaps why so many of you have joined us here today. The sea, the great unifier, is man's only hope. Now, as never before, the old phrase has a literal meaning. We are all in the same boat. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.